Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing The Lighthouse. This film was written and directed by Roger Eggers, and it was co-written by his brother, Max Eggers. This is Eggers' second feature-length film after The Witch, which is a film that I really liked a lot when it came out a few years ago, and I've seen it multiple times. I would say there are a lot of similarities between the two films, but there are lots of symbols that also contrast the two films, especially from a moral narrative perspective. But they really do work well, just in terms of style, they're very different, but they work well as two pieces that are kind of at the end of the same spectrum. Both films are really rooted in atmosphere, in paranoia, and both films use nature in a way where it's pitted against its main cast of characters in a way that reveals them. It sort of pecks away at their impulses and their primal instincts in a way that turns them against each other. Both films incorporate a lot of mythology, a lot of ancient folklore. With The Witch, it tended to be more satanic imagery, whereas The Lighthouse used a lot more kind of Greek and Roman mythos. Lots of references to Prometheus and Neptune, etc., just in the imagery. But the differences between the films, to me, are what give Eggers, just as a writer, both the Egger brothers, it gives them a lot of facets as creators, just in terms of their ideas. For instance, both protagonists in the film The Witch, as well as in The Lighthouse, they are drawn to a sort of light, but this light is a lot more complex than it seems. It has more shades, no pun intended. With Thomasin in The Witch, there's a sense of liberation, of course, and rebellion as she kind of becomes her fully realized self in the end. But in The Lighthouse, our protagonist is in a sort of moral conflict, a moral stronghold when he is able to confront this light. He is, in a sense, facing his own sins and morality, but they're both compelling uses of a similar symbol, and both of them use it in a very different but interesting way. The Lighthouse is stylistically, it is absolutely incredible. It feels so rooted in its influences to a scary degree. It's shot in black and white, heavily contrasty, lots and lots of shadows. It is using a lot of imagery that is very reminiscent of a lot of German expressionist films for the early half of the 20th century. A lot of silent era films like Nosferatu, and I would even say Carl Dreyer. One film this kept reminding me of was Vampire, which is a film by Carl Dreyer that came out in, I want to say 1931, could be wrong on that, but that's a film I really love, just in terms of how the imagery is able to carry you. And this film has a similar effect. But he's also drawing upon some later influences as well, such as Bergman. That's something I noticed as well. I think I might have mentioned that in my review for The Witch. More kind of later influences from like more experimental and art house cinema. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of the aesthetic, it's just absolutely pitch perfect, the tops. And I really like the square, almost square aspect ratio that the film's going with there, because it forces everything to be very compact and almost claustrophobic, which fits the mood of the characters. It forces everything that's important to run into the center. It's almost like a little stream that's being gathered. It's forcing a sort of psychological push and pull between these two characters that are constantly forced at the center. The story is really, really simple. It's just about two guys that are on an island alone, and they're lighthouse keepers. They're both supposed to be there for about 4 weeks. They really don't like each other, and that they're just basically trying to maintain normalcy and routine amidst all this building tension and frustration. And their relationship is really revealing human behavior. I would say obviously more male behavior, masculinity, and how it's put to the test. It's done in a way where you're starting to see all the violence and the primality and the homoeroticism. And all of this comes together in a way that is very bizarre. It's very eccentric. It's very funny. Willem Dafoe is wonderful in the film. He's an actor that I greatly admire. I think I probably have said that before on here. I don't know, but he's an actor that seemingly has no vanity when he picks his projects. He really takes more risks on screen than most actors do that have his acclaim and notoriety. He is a character actor, essentially, and he has this ability, his face, it's like he can bend and morph it into the most strange, most bizarre and creepy facial expressions. I always thought that he would be somebody that I would have loved to see be in the silent era. Because he's so good with his face. To me, I think he would have fit right along with people like Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. And he's creating a brilliantly authentic character here. And he plays Thomas Wake, who just physically and in terms of his voice and everything, he's just gnarly. Gnarly is the best word I can think of. He's just hunched over and he's croaking his dialogue out. And it sounds, when he's talking, it sounds like this collection of 19th century, like I guess pirate or like seaman proverbs. Sometimes he is very difficult to understand, and you start to wonder if he's even making sense at all, or if it's just you. Is this just some sort of weird word salad as the film becomes more unhinged and the insanity begins to affect both of the characters? Your protagonist here is Winslow, who is played by Robert Pattinson, who is very different in contrast to Willem Dafoe's character. He's almost taciturn at first. As the film goes along and the walls are closing in, though, the two go from being polar opposites in terms of just characterization to sort of blending into one another, where it's almost like they're becoming one organism, or like one nucleus. You start to wonder who is who, and whether or not there's even a Thomas Wake at all. Maybe he's merely an aspect of Winslow's psyche, and it's forcing itself to the surface in a way that's very aggressive and very, very dangerous because he's psychologically unraveling. I love the way these two go at each other. I love the way they sort of snarl and bark at each other, quite literally. The logic, of course, needs to blur between the two men and what they perceive. They go from very tense and frustrated to violent, bizarre, comical, because they're kind of pushing at the edges of how much their minds can take. And ultimately, there is that homoeroticism building throughout, and there are a lot of almost psychedelic, I would say, psychedelic themes and imagery within. There is a very erotic sort of sexual tone throughout the entire film, even just with the rhythm of the water and the waves as they sort of slosh against the ship at the very beginning. That aspect of it is sort of the core for me. That is the sort of thing that's driving the behavior and the primal instincts of the main character, especially, as all of this stuff is bubbling to the surface. Well, everything is starting to become more psychedelic, as I said, and surreal, as insanity or cabin fever essentially will tend to do. I think the way all of that is handled in terms of the direction is really good, just with that special rhythm. And you get to a point where all the shots are starting to run into each other, where you can't tell what's concrete and what is supposed to be surreal. And you really don't know, there's really no concept of time. Like, they're supposed to be on this rock for about 4 weeks, but at a certain point, I mean, it could be years that they've been on here. As time is disbanding, it really does feel like an acid trip. You're very removed from everything. There's a dizzying quality to it, to the psychedelic imagery, with the mermaid, and as I said, more the Greek and Roman imagery. And the emotion that's raging inside really is represented through the ocean. It's all very, very good stuff. I can't say enough about the film's tone and style for sure. However, I do think that Eggers, just as a writer, he has more in him. I really want him to push further, because I think he can really push into some dangerous areas, more off-kilter areas. He has it in him to be more bold. I want him to really take his time with the unraveling in a more ambitious way, where the narrative itself is also matching the tone and the style, because as it stands, like I said, I can't say enough things about the aesthetic and the way it looks, but I don't feel that the narrative itself and the ideas behind it are quite matching. I think it suffers just slightly in terms of the way the narrative goes into the third act, because I feel like the brothers are sort of writing the protagonist into a corner. When you have a story that is so full of all of these ideas, so full of like folklore and like, all this mythology, in the end, the conclusion to all of it feels a little bit thin. It doesn't open itself up to all of the ideas that it's trying to juggle. But I'm not saying that it goes off the rails at all or anything like that. For the most part, I would say this film is very tightly constructed, and it feels very focused. I just wish it had more within the narrative that met all of this complex and very intriguing imagery, laced with all these grandiose themes and that come from tales of old. But overall, I really enjoyed this film. I was really engrossed in it, and I appreciate all of the atmosphere and all the ideas going on here. I really like Eggers as a creator. I think both films are very good, and I would love to see this movie again. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All of my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.